Well, most of the stuff going on Friday's 70th anniversary Silverstone was away from the racetrack. Primarily the decision by the FIA to penalise Racing Point as a result of protests from Renault, only Renault, it has to be said, interestingly enough, about the legality of their brake ducts, which Renault said were based on those of the 2019 Mercedes. And according to the current reading of the regulations, you can't copy the brake ducts of another Formula One team, even if you have got approval to use some of the other parts, the aerodynamics, for example. There was a lot of grey area there because in 2019 you could do that in theory, but now it's 2020, but it's a 2019 part. But the decision has been made, kind of, I think. They're declaring the brake ducts illegal, as a result of which Racing Point are going to lose 15 of their constructors' points, but not their drivers' points, and they're being fined 400,000 euros. But on the other side of the coin, they are keeping their driver's points, as I say, and they can keep these brake ducts on the car for the rest of the year. So if you were Renault, you'd be thinking, well, are they legal or are they not? And if you were another driver, you would be thinking, hang on, I've just been outpointed by the driver of a car with, in theory, illegal brake ducts, and yet he's keeping his points, and I've had to drive flat out just to finish behind him. Where's the logic in that? So to me, this is a classic example of trying to keep everybody happy and trying to come to a happy compromise, bearing in mind there is one legal point around which the FIA have focused. I suppose you can't criticize them too much for wanting to please everybody, but the bottom line is that Racing Point will be continuing to use these brake ducts, so they'll be very quick still, and they were quick indeed today at Silverstone. Nico Hülkenberg still driving the car, as Sergio Perez has still tested positive again for COVID, so we wish him a very speedy recovery. He may be back, of course, for the Spanish Grand Prix. He may not. Well, let's hope he is, from his point of view. And to remind you, the Spanish Grand Prix is next weekend, so this is the middle of yet another triple header in Formula One, so already the Formula One personnel kind of dead on their feet as I speak, absolutely exhausted and shattered. And then there's all the travel and the logistics to getting to Barcelona, but perhaps that's another subject for a little bit further into the weekend. As I speak, Racing Point really quick today, right up there with Red Bull, Lance Stroll and Nico Hülkenberg. Max Verstappen looking pretty good, about where he was relative to the Mercedes, and both Mercedes again on top. And Daniel Ricciardo continuing to show the pace that was displayed in the first British Grand Prix and about which we talked going into that race as well. So that was one thing. The other is that Mercedes apparently are getting nervous about signing a new agreement with Liberty to continue in Formula One based on the new financial structure. Now, this new financial payment structure is a result of lots of discussions with lots of teams. In my view, perhaps too much discussion with the midfield and back of the grid teams, thinking that if more money is paid to them, the gap may be smaller and racing may be more competitive. I think that's kind of missing the point. The real point here, and it goes back to the Racing Point Renault dispute, is that we should allow customer cars in Formula One. Of course, I don't mean a template chassis from Dallara for everybody. What I'm talking about is that Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, and anybody else, McLaren, Renault, continue to do their thing, design and build their own car. But they should be free to sell last year's car to customers. It could be to Williams, it could be to Dams, it could be to ART, it could be to any of these great Formula 2 teams that if given the chance to build up personnel to come into Formula One would do a very, very good job. And because we don't allow that, there's this disparity between the front of the grid and the back. And I don't think it's going to be solved by giving more money to the midfield and less money to the front. Because all it's going to do is wind up people like Toto Wolff. And that's what's going on right now. The solution is customer cars. So this is where Formula One is at the moment. There's an incredibly difficult to understand, splitting hairs, legal definition of the Racing Point brake ducts, which, depending on whether you're looking at the glass half full or half empty, means they're legal or illegal. I'm not quite sure which. And then beyond that, you've got Mercedes saying, if we don't get more money, we may not sign into the new Formula One for 2021. Both those points, in my view, are related, but I'm sure they'll never, ever bridge the gap between them. This is Formula One after all. The only other point I think to make on Friday, 70th anniversary Friday at Silverstone, is how good it is to see the talk, to listen to the talk about the 70th anniversary, little things coming up on the screen about Louis Chiron or the prize money at the first British Grand Prix in 1950, £500 for the winner. Actually quite a lot of money for Giuseppe Farina. I wonder if he took it all. Interesting point. Yeah, good to see all that, because Formula One, like rest of motor racing really, is always thinking ahead. It's, you know, if Enzo Ferrari, the famous answer, Enzo, what is your commendatore? What is your favorite all-time Ferrari Formula One car? And he'd always reply, the one I've not yet built. Frank Williams was the same. It's always tomorrow. It's always the next piece of engineering. So it's refreshing, I think, just to press pause a little bit on this weekend to look back at some of our heritage. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. One thing I would say is that we see that number 70 quite a lot. And two things here, actually. One is that I don't think we should forget that motor racing did begin before 1950. And in saying that Silverstone held the first World Championship Grand Prix for drivers, that's fair enough. But we shouldn't forget, when it comes to racing drivers, Tazio Nuvolari, Bernd Rosenmeier, Caracciolo, Kilivazzi, because without them, we wouldn't have the Formula One that began in 1950. They're a part of all the heritage. Also, there's a bit of talk about 52 and 53, when Formula One was actually run to Formula 2 regulations. So should they be considered to be part of this 70th anniversary? My answer to that is yes, because I don't think Formula One would have continued in any form had it not gone to Formula 2 in those 2 years. There was so little money around, there were so few cars around, it would have been a joke, really. And think about this. There we had a wonderful cameo for 2 years of one of the greatest racing drivers of all time, Alberto Ascari, in the fabulous Ferrari 500, dominating things, admittedly, but nonetheless, if you wanted a showcase for how good Ascari was, 52 and 53 is what you look at. Formula One was actually run to Formula 2 regulations, so should they be considered to be part of this 70th anniversary? My answer to that is yes, because I don't think Formula One would have continued in any form had it not gone to Formula 2 in those 2 years. There was so little money around, there were so few cars around, it would have been a joke, really. And think about this. There we had a wonderful cameo for 2 years of one of the greatest racing drivers of all time, Alberto Ascari, in the fabulous Ferrari 500, dominating things, admittedly, but nonetheless, if you wanted a showcase for how good Ascari was, 52 and 53 is what you look at. And Dennis Jenkinson, probably the most influential and important motoring journalist of the 20th century, always said that his top 5 was Alberto Ascari, Sterling Moss, Jim Clark, Gilles Villeneuve, Ayrton Senna. Ascari was that good. See you over the weekend.